Welcome to my video on the 2007 movie 1408. I'm going to start with a spoiler-free review, and then I will later, after verbally letting you know I'm entering it, I will get into a spoiler section where I spoil both versions as well as deleted scenes and the short story. But the review itself isn't going to spoil any of those things. That's right, we are closing out Halloween month 2025 with this, and let's see, I'm not going to get into too much preamble. The movie is rated PG-13, so will this video be. And this is a movie that I love a lot about, but I wouldn't say that I ultimately fully love the movie as a whole. The setup here is that we're following author Michael Ensslin, who investigates supposed haunted houses and writes, a short, kind of tacky seeming review to let people know, rating it on a scale of like 0 to 10. And he has found a place that is said to be more haunted than any other place he's been. Room 1408. And he intends to spend the night there, as he's done, a number of other places. Tens of them, apparently, because his books tend to have, it's like 10 haunted... And yeah, we follow him go into that room and see what happens there. That's essentially the elevator pitch. It is also almost the entire pitch. And this pitch is simultaneously the movie's greatest strength, other than Cusack's performance and the way that they treat certain elements, arguably, and also the movie's greatest weakness, other than perhaps... No, you know what? I think probably it's, the movie's greatest strength and greatest weakness. Greatest strength for reasons such as the fact that genuinely this is a movie that you can very quickly get people, let people know more or less what to expect. When it comes, like, there's a lot of media where, it takes a little bit more to explain, especially if you don't want to give something big away. Horror is one of those genres where, like, if you pick a horror movie at random, like, it's very much like you might end up with a new favorite and you might waste time, and it's especially frustrating with the ones where it's very difficult to elevator pitch them. Another reason is that it forces it to focus in a way that there are other horror stories that struggle to. It's a effective device for, as we see the events, we learn more about Mike. Which, again, there are movies out there where we don't learn that much about the main character because there's just so much other stuff going on. I think those might be the reasons for it being a strength. And yeah. Why it's a weakness. I wouldn't say that it ends up overstaying its welcome by that much, but it definitely is very thin. They do what they can to flesh it out, to make it, something really compelling. And a lot of the way, I think they actually do succeed. And yeah, I think that might be the yeah. I mean, I do think it is noteworthy. This was apparently, if I understand correctly, Stephen King, right? Did I mention it's adapted from a Stephen King short story? He basically just wrote, like, he threw something. Okay, not the final version, but the initial, like, concept. He basically just threw something together to, like, write, a guide or some tips for, like, editing your short story. I mean, if you've ever, I've opened one or two, one of those books that help you, well, I guess now it's online, but whatever, one of those things where you get, like, tips for improving your creative writing, yeah. Some of those have examples, and this was meant to be an example. And then King was like, I could actually make something of this. The short story itself, it's one of those cases. I think if you like the movie, you'll like the short story, and vice versa. It's not one of those where I feel like if you've only done one of them, then you know exactly what the other one will be. One of the things going on is the fact that the short story can very much put us in his head, whereas the movie is more visual. And yeah, I mean, if you're gonna do both, I recommend reading the short story before watching the movie. But if you go the other direction, I think you'll still, like, I mean, I have watched this movie every so often. I've probably had the DVD for like 15 years. Has it been 10 years since I last watched it? There was a while where I watched it a number of times. And I only listened through the short story recently for the sake of this review. So I still got a lot out of, I was still really, really into, and for that, okay, I am not a literary critic, so I'm not going to go too in depth. It's not King's best work, but it's fine, yeah. I think that pretty well covers the setup. So the psychological accuracy is really, really strong here. We see the way Mike reacts to, I'm not going to give too much away, but, what happens. We see the way that it affects him. The authenticity is quite impressive. The hotel room itself is a set rather than location, and I mean, there's a lot of people who I don't even have to explain to why, but yeah, in case you don't already realize, yeah, it's way easier to deal with production on a set than in an actual hotel room. Like, what are they going to do? Just not have other guests nearby that might be loud and ruin takes? Or, like, there's, yeah. And yeah, as a set. Like, I've never visited the hotel. I think it's a real hotel. I don't remember. They mention it's called the Dolphin. I do not. I looked it up once. My wrists are too sore right now to check, but hypothetically, maybe it's a real hotel. It definitely feels like a real hotel room, and they did do some location shooting at an actual hotel. And there are a lot of great little touches. There, certain parts of 1408 are still the way that they would have been a while back, because they didn't modernize, because people keep dying in the room. So, at some point, like, it's a lot, the ledger's gushing red. But then there are other parts that do feel very modern and up to date, and it's, I don't know, it just has there's a certain something to that mix. The room feels wrong in a very, from like the moment you see the inside of the room, it feels like, okay, there is definitely something wrong here. And yeah, it starts with those aspects of set design. The level of detail is quite good. They do this thing. See, one of the things I love about this is they made a lot of smart decisions here. So as soon as he enters the room, which is not like immediately, like there is a I don't want to give away but how much, but there are at least some minutes before, and it also doesn't like only happen at the near the end or something. It happens early, but it's not immediate. I do think there probably is an interesting story, I don't know if it's feature length, that starts with him already in the room. But anyway, yeah, they do some very effective build-up before he even enters the room. But as soon as he enters, he walks around. So we get an idea of the geography of the entire room. It's a like expensive hotel room, so it has its own bathroom, for example. Um, you know, there's other than the bed, like there's other areas, there's room for, like you could have a party in this room, basically. Not like a huge one, but like you could get together like a half dozen people, and there'd be room for people to dance if you moved a little furniture around, And over the course of the film, it makes very efficient use of the space. Things happen in different parts of the room. Because like if we're going to be spending a lot of time in the room, you gotta make it a really, for one thing, you need it big enough that he can like move around and feel like he's, that there's variety to the, this one set, to the places he goes on this one set, and the to make sure they give themselves enough to work with for the supernatural stuff. The tone is managed very well. There is at least one thing here that very easily could derail the tone, like could make it feel just silly. And in my opinion, it doesn't. I've shown this movie to several people. None of them felt that it went overboard. There are a few laughs. They are intended. And yeah, I think it does a good job with the concept. It didn't feel like by the end of it, I didn't feel like they had really left any stone unturned. They really, some would say, milked it for all it's worth. Like, again, I don't think it hugely overstays its welcome. But it is also, I mean, I think maybe 100 minutes for the director's cut or something. Which, yeah, so I would definitely recommend, if you're going to watch this and you have a choice in the matter, go with the director's cut. The theatrical is not as good for reasons that I'm going to get into in the spoiler section, because they're spoilers. But yeah, overall, like, it's been years since I watched it, but I remember. I'm not going to do like an exact comparison. I feel like I've seen some have made a very careful comparison of the two versions, but the yeah, I have watched the theatrical. I'm not sure I've watched it more than once. And it was years ago, but like, yeah, if you don't have another choice and you really, really love the concept, then it's perfectly fine. So, adaptation-wise, I don't have to tell you, Stephen King adaptations are a very mixed bag. That is just, I don't know, I'm pretty sure at this point, you could, like, ask a newborn baby, and they could inform you of that. This is one of the better, but it's not the best. Let's see. I saw one person say that, like, Brian De Palma and Stanley Kubrick are probably the most effective when it comes to adaptations of his supernatural horror. Yeah. I don't know. From what I remember, Christine, John Carpenter's was also quite impressive. Though I appreciate I hear that it's very different from the book in ways that bothered some people. Now, yes, it makes very clear that it was written by people who really, really appreciate the short story, because there are certain parts that are exactly, like some visuals are exactly as described in the short story, and a little bit of like dialogue is lifted directly. And there's also a line in the movie that I understand was something Stephen King wrote not as fiction, but as part of his foreword for one of his books. So that's they did their homework, like, yeah, I don't know. I was a little reminded of like watching, having read a fair bit of Philip K. Dick myself, watching the Schwarzenegger Total Recall, and being like, okay, that part's not in the short story, but it is in Paycheck. Like, nicely done. Like, yeah, I'm pretty sure at the time they were probably like, they're never gonna make a Paycheck movie. And I mean, if they did, it probably wouldn't be very good. They had foresight. That movie could have been so much better. I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, they were very honest when adapting it of what they absolutely couldn't make work, rather than trying to force it, and instead came up with stuff to really, like, it is very much a short story made to feature length. Of those, it is among the less egregious that I've seen. there's a lot of those that are just like, what are you doing? This is not, there's not enough here for feature length, They add some stuff that, in the book, like, we don't get as much like background on Mike, and like the book is more like his experience of room 1408, where the movie, it's that, but it's also, okay, but here's some of what Mike has, experienced, or what he's fearing, perhaps, stuff like that, and that is one way that I really think they did a solid job of, because like, as soon as you have this, supernatural thing, you can essentially do, like, you're only limited by imagination and perhaps budget, and they had a good amount of both and put it to good use. By the end of it, I felt like, okay, I know who this person is. It's almost sort of a character study, along with the sort of, yeah, I think that's what I want to say about that. Yeah, and I do also think it is one of those cases where they picked a story where it does work in a visual medium. That's also something, like, I've read a little bit of King that I definitely felt like, okay, there's no way they could make this visual, And that's also, I mean, I think I did probably talk about that in my video on, I think it was called the Boogeyman, or maybe just Boogeyman without the. I don't know. Maybe there's multiple out there. That film doesn't necessarily really adapt the short story. There is an interesting relationship between the two versions of the story. I think I talk about that. I think it's maybe a spoiler. I forget. I believe I talked about it in my video on that movie. But that was very much a case where, yeah, the short story, I don't know how you make that into, like, I saw someone attempt to make it into a short film, and even there they had to make some concessions. They had to change some things. I don't know that you could make it feature length without just, like, yeah, doing something else, as that movie does. And yeah, there's a lot in that short story that's simply too much specific to, it can work in writing when you read it, but it cannot work visually. You cannot just watch someone. I wouldn't rule out, I would honestly play, if someone tried to adapt some of the sort of unadaptable King short stories, some of the ones that could not work as a feature film, make it like a video game, like point and click maybe, or something. I think that could work. But yeah. So the dialogue is very well written and well delivered. And yeah, of the they do a really good job of some of the exchanges. There is a one of the things is just watching. There's a very early scene where Mike, as played by John Cusack, talks to, so I always get these titles wrong, but he is very high up in working for the hotel. Olin, played by Samuel Jackson, and watching the two, like, it's really, really entertaining. You know, I have more to say about their characters, but I want to talk about some other things first. So the direction is very self-assured. I have not watched that much by Mikael Hofström. I think that's how you pronounce it. I believe he's Swedish. I am Danish. So if I mispronounced it, it is not on purpose. I know there are a bunch of Danish people who hate Swedes for no reason that I've been able to deduce. I am not one of them. I am quite fond of his Swedish movie Ondskan, or Evil. I believe it's from 2003, about a boarding school. And yeah, it's very nice to see him get to make English language movies. I don't think they're inherently better, but they are able to reach a wider audience, And I am aware of at least one other movie he's made, but those are the only two. These are the only two that I've watched. And when I first heard about this, I was a little bit worried that it was one of those, it was like selling out, going Hollywood kind of things. This does very much still have a beating heart, not the telltale kind, and you can tell that Hafström is invested. This doesn't feel like a paycheck, or just a paycheck, rather. And I thought he did a very consistently strong job at making us be able to follow the sort of dream logic, and also, like, why is Michael doing what he's doing? So not necessarily that we agree, but ideally we can follow. That's I think it's frustrating sometimes when you watch, a piece of supernatural horror, and a character is just saying or doing something, and we can't understand why. Like, yeah, I'm gonna move on. The cinematography is one of the most key aspects to making this whole thing work. The camera will sometimes get ahead of Michael and sometimes follow him carefully. It is part of what makes it feel so surreal at times. There is one wonderful impossible camera move, which I'm pretty fond of when they use that. It doesn't have to be horror, but like if you're making a genre picture and you're trying to underline, hey, look at how messed up this is, yeah, do one of those, like we have the technology now. I get that some people think, no, you should stick to stuff that can be done with a real camera, but yeah. And it always, it's a big part of setting the mood, and the mood does change over the course of it. The editing is also great. There are a couple of wonderful match cuts. The way that it goes between, stuff like shortcut, establishing shot, medium, stuff like that, is very effective. There's a couple of bits that, you wouldn't expect the editing to do what it does. And I watched the, little bit of deleted scenes. I think they did a good job of trimming out stuff that, perhaps goes on A little too long? In the deleted scenes, not in... okay, so there's one part in this that arguably goes on for too long, takes up too much... yeah. I am going to discuss it in the spoiler section, but just be forewarned. You know, there is at least one part that does that. And I know why they did it. I 100% understand. And I think at least part of the way it accomplishes what it sets out to do. But, and I'll get to the but later. So the production value is very impressive. There is... yeah, it feels extravagant, the room itself, and it doesn't feel like they're really holding back on account of like a lack of budget, you know. Maybe I should rewatch something Roger Corman. I don't know, just randomly his name popped into my head. But yeah, seriously, you know, I like some of his work, but that was very much a case where you could tell, okay, they don't have a lot of money to work with here. And for some horror, that can really work. Sometimes it can feel very limiting, and that's very much not the case in 1408. The set design, so I've already talked a little bit about it, but the... yeah, the way that they'll, you know, we see the very, you know, appealing with a little bit off, wrong stuff set, you know, fairly early in this, and then stuff starts happening that you know, changes various parts of the set, and yeah, that it's very it works quite well. The location shooting is also very, like, they do such a good job of making us feel like, okay, yeah, with, you know, this is definitely not a set inside, you know, a studio. This is an actual, you know, they did go some actual places, but we end up believing that 1408 is real. Like, you know, every time I watch it, like, I've seen the behind the scenes, you know, it's some of it's on the DVD. I know for a fact it's a set. And yet when I watch the movie, I find myself really buying into the illusion. So that was quite well done. And I think it also helps that some of the location shooting means that we see Michael in a couple of different places before he enters 1408. So the contrast is very nicely done there. It feels like, you know, we end up thinking about all the places he's lost access to, in addition to worrying, you know, about him being in 1408. And the more time we spend in there, the more it gets to us how trapped he, and by extension we, are. Costumes are very nicely done. I appreciate the detail that he does indeed wear the Hawaiian shirt. I I don't know why I didn't. The moment that I saw him in a Hawaiian shirt, I should have immediately clocked it as like, okay, that was definitely in the short story. That's a Stephen King idea, 100%. But yeah, you know, the short story specifies that he thinks it brings good luck. You know, but yeah, I saw at least one reviewer that said, I think they used the word tacky about it, which can't really argue with that. But yeah, you know, I mean, Stephen King, I'm not saying he's perfect. He does have a knack for writing memorable characters, and some of it is these little details, you know. And Mike, in this movie, as in the short story, even more so than the short story, is a memorable character. And yeah, the makeup, there's some really nicely done stuff there that I am not going to talk about before the spoiler section. The music. There is one particular piece of music that plays multiple times, and yeah, is quite nicely done. And the score is incredibly effective. Like very the it feels it's very disturbing, you know. The sound design is also quite impressive. There's a couple of things that just make the exact right noise to really get to us. And the characters, there's not that many characters in this. I do think they do a good job of utilizing the ones there are pretty much to their full potential. And I definitely wouldn't say that any of the characters overstay their welcome. I can imagine some people getting frustrated with Mike himself, but I think once you watch the entire thing, you know, certain things you have more of an appreciation of why he does certain things. And let's see. So I've already talked some about... Yeah, let's talk acting. So Mike is a very... not even trying to hide self-insert, you know, a writer who deals with the supernatural and like writes stuff that not everybody thinks the highest of, and it's okay, yeah, you know, it's very overt. So John Cusack is in part playing Stephen King, and he is one of the he's a pretty good Stephen King self-insert, you know. I will acknowledge, though obviously, you know, on account of how he treated Amber Heard, my opinion of Johnny Depp has plummeted. But I will acknowledge he played a pretty good Stephen King self-insert as well. I hear good things about James Caan. I still need to watch Misery. Yeah. I think from what I've heard, I think I would love Misery as Misery loves company. But the yeah, Cusack, there's an enthusiasm in his performance, and you know, even if I hadn't watched interviews and such, I could tell, okay, he wanted to do this. You know, this was something he genuinely found of fascinating. Yeah, he spends some of this movie essentially alone, and I love that they kept the little recorder that he keeps. That's, you know, they kept that from the short story, and it is one of the, you know, I've seen some compare it to the I want to say volleyball from Castaway, another movie I still haven't watched. I know. At some point I'll probably get to it. I hear good things, you know. Yeah, basically it is a way for Michael to say things out loud that would otherwise be like voiceover. And while I think there are some incredible uses of voiceover, you know, some films that I love use voiceover incredibly well. You know, American Psycho and I can't believe I'm blanking on the other. It's sibling, the other Bret Easton Ellis novel adaptation, The Rules of Attraction. Both fantastic voiceover, you know, but I don't know that it would have worked that well for this. It's that thing of like it's a fascinating thing. If you're reading a story and there's what would in a visual story would be voiceover, you know, if you're reading it, fine. But as soon as you put visuals to it, voiceover can feel distancing, you know, in a way that I don't know that I can really explain, but that is part of the reason that when you see adaptations of written work, a lot of them try to do away with the voiceover or limit it tremendously. And yeah, here, like, the fact that he's able to, because the thing is, he wants to prove that 1408 is not haunted. So every so often, he's gonna turn on the recorder and, you know, basically say, okay, so the thing that just happened, I know that's not really haunting because of this, you know. So you see the way that he's trying to, like, reason his way through this situation, and it just works so well. I really love that they have that element in there. It's a strong element in the short story as well, but in my opinion, it's even better here. And yeah, like the fact that he is basically alone, and it's him talking to the recorder and his face and his physical, it's a very physical performance, you know, that sustains so much of this movie, as basically he is reacting to all of these things. There's a lot of actors, there's a lot of incredible talents out there who would not be able to completely make it work. And yeah, the fact that Cusack does, like, I mean, yeah, I've been a fan of his for over 20 years now. Yeah, I'm not going to claim that this is like the best he's ever done, but I think it is, of the ones that I've watched. There's a lot that I haven't watched yet, but yeah, it's one of my favorite performances of his. You know, he's also great in, you know, Con Air, for example, and Grosse Point Blank. In that last one, he also gets to spar a little with his real life sister, Joan Cusack, who I don't think I've ever seen do a bad job. Like, if she's in a movie, I'm definitely going to enjoy her scenes bare minimum, you know. Addams Family Values, Looney Tunes Back in Action, the Toy Story, you know, franchise. Like, just, yeah. Now, I think that might more or less cover. Yeah, I thought he did a really solid job with the way that, you know, because early on, he likes to hide what he's thinking and feeling, you know. He's one of those people who think that for some of this, imagine if, like, one of the ugh, Reddit threads was a flesh and blood human being, you know. Like, he's very annoying. Uh, there's Reddit atheist energy all over his, at least early on. You know, I'm not going to give away whether he changes as such, but I definitely don't think that he stays as annoying as he can be to at least some very early on. And yeah, you know, we find out why it happened, and I thought he did a fantastic job of, because like there are things that are new to us but not to him, so he's being reminded of things that we're seeing for the first time, and it's this, he has to, it has to be clear to the yeah, for us, the audience, we are watching him be forced to think about something that he likes to not think about, and for there to be an emotional reaction to something that isn't new to him, but is to us, and still it doesn't feel like we're just watching someone else, we have to be invested. We have to be there with him, even though we're seeing something that he already knew, that sort of thing. And yeah, like you can tell from early on that there's something he's not dealing with. There's something that he's pushing away. And over the course of the movie, we find out what it is. And I can appreciate that in a way it's a little tropey, but I think it works. I guess I should say this is a movie where like they play with tropes at least a little bit. It's not quite, Joss Whedon, and yes, I appreciate that he is canceled, and I'm not trying to uncancel him. But I did appreciate the way that they did. Certain things are played straight, and others not as much. Yeah, let's see. Samuel Jackson. They talk about on the DVD, he was not on anybody's radar for this part. In the short story, the character is white and overweight. They were thinking, well, let's get an aging, incredibly talented white guy. And let's see, I think it was Weinstein, so yeah. Showed the script to Quentin Tarantino. Yeah, because that particular Tarantino, and yeah, he loved the script and he suggested Sam Jackson, and it's genuinely such an inspired choice. Like again, I'm not saying Tarantino is perfect, but the man can cast a movie, not even one he's directing. Sometimes also other people's movies, because the energy between them, I hugely disagree with. I saw one reviewer say that Jackson basically needed, he was like sedated, I think was the word they used. Hugely disagree. I thought the way that because the thing is, a lot of the time when we think Sam Jackson, we think one of his more like aggressive, sometimes more verbally than physically, types. Tarantino helped, define him as that, in, for example, Pulp Fiction. And to see him here, where he can only be so intense because he would like to keep his job, please, thank you. And this is a potential guest, so he can't push too hard, but you can tell that there is like a passion there. It's buried under layers of professionalism. And the scene in his office where he tries to convince Mike away from it, and Mike stubbornly insists, and they have some really great little lines and just little. At one point, Mike says, "You don't mind if our little friend here records this conversation, do you?" Turns on his recorder, puts it on the table between them, and just the way that, because like they both have power in this situation, and it genuinely is this like almost chess match, um, of the both of them trying to outwit the other, both like to get what they want and also come up with a genuinely witty retort to what the other said. And yeah, there's some wonderful little things in there. I'll talk more about it in the spoiler section. I don't really want to give it away, but yeah. I don't have an awful lot specific to say about the rest of the cast. They're all admirable. They do really sell what there is. I think a case could be made that really only the two characters I've mentioned are drawn that like what's the word? Sketched out maybe. They're the ones that get more depth, whereas the others at times kind of boil down to archetypes, and I don't think it harms the overall product that much. But you know, if you go into it thinking that there's going to be more to the other characters, I think you might be disappointed. And it's not a spoiler to say, you know, it very much is about Mike. So the pacing, I already mentioned that there's a chunk of this that isn't the best pacing wise. Other than that, they do a good job. I was impressed by how well they managed to make this feature length. I will definitely say, I saw someone, you know, point out it's essentially a Twilight Zone episode, but it's a good one. I agree. I do think that a case could be made that if America still put short films and such into theaters, I think this might have been just a short film, and I think that would have worked well, possibly even better. And definitely I think maybe the ideal version of this story, that 1408 as filmed, is as an episode of, for example, The Twilight Zone. 42 minutes, and yeah. So, in my video on Sunshine, I guess less than a week ago, I said that I didn't think 2007 produced another movie where the special effects were always above reproach. At the time, I hadn't yet planned on doing this movie, but I stand by what I said. There's a couple of shots. One of them I can give away because it's when they open the door to 1408. And I get that it would have been a hassle to do practically, because basically what we're shown is the inside of the lock as the key unlocks. That could have been done practically. I think in the 80s in the 80s it either would have been practical or it wouldn't have been in the movie. Yeah, it's a little distracting. You feel like, okay, we're in CGI town now. With that said, I appreciate how much of this they did practically. They really went above and beyond in trying to keep the effects practical whenever at all possible, and it really, really helps tremendously. Most of the effects, I would say, are spoilers, but I will say they do a good job of using the technology at their disposal. You know, there's a little bit too much CG, but ultimately not that much. Like, it's not that many. I don't think it's more than, like, I don't know, a certain number of seconds of this that are CG. I'm not sure it's even a full minute that's CG. Everything else, practical or some other, you know. And they use the different things available to them to strong effect. Like, this is one of those things, a practical effect, no matter how good, is a tool. As such, there's a right and wrong place and time to use it. And I don't think they ever really misuse one of them here. So let's see, I guess, yeah, so I'll briefly note, so the couple of, yeah, there's not a huge amount of humor here. What there is tends to work, and I thought they did a really good job of early on using, like, stuff starts happening that's weird in 1408 from not very long after it's entered. But early on, Mike doesn't really want to accept that it's supernatural. So he's, you know, running around trying to find, you know, he really wants to pay attention to the man behind the curtain. And there's a little bit of humor there. And I thought they did a good job of not letting the humor distract from the horror. A lot of the way this is centered on making us uneasy in a way that, you know, hotel rooms can, which, you know, there's a little bit of line, you know, dialogue, I guess it counts as spoken words in this, which is, you know, as mentioned, Stephen King wrote that as like part of a foreword. And yeah, it's focused on building. You know, it actually reminded me a little of John Carpenter in that way. You know, it wants us to not feel comfortable or calm. And I think that more or less covers that. And they use the various tools at their disposal to build. And yeah, you know, so some of the time it's quiet. Other times it's a bit more like aggressive in your face. And yeah, they do a good job making the horror varied. There are jump scares, but other times it is this slow build. I saw one reviewer say it's like Evil Dead and Alfred Hitchcock, or as directed by Alfred Hitchcock or something, which is a fun, you know, I noted in my video on The Evil Dead, there's definitely some Hitchcock there, you know. That's part of Sam Raimi's sensibilities, very clearly on display. But yeah, I definitely think there is, yeah, there are parts of this where it feels Hitchcockian in the way that it just, you know, we know there's something wrong. We can't 100% put our finger on what, and we're slowly watching it unravel. And I think that might be a decent segue into, so something that is echoed in multiple reviews of this. This is not torture porn, because this was, you know, back when I mean, I remember we're worried back then about, like, is that it? Are we only going to get torture porn horror from now on? Like, it was scary, and not because of, you know, the torture, but because that was seemingly all we were getting, because they were so popular. And I'm not going to go into a huge discussion of torture porn here. I've done it in other videos, though I can't claim that I remember right now where. But no, it definitely does feel like a much more classic, traditional horror movie than, yeah. And it was nice that to see that, yeah, like people still wanted to watch something like this. And I think that does pretty much get us to... So it is not like extremely violent on account of the PG-13. This is one of the more effective PG-13s that I've, or at least the director's cut. And honestly, right now I'm blanking on, is that even PG-13? It's certainly not a hard R. It might be R-rated, but yeah, that one does have a decent amount. The theatrical cut, from what I recall, is less. Yeah, it doesn't go as hard on, it's more psychological horror, and I do think psychological horror can be great. I love. I mean, part of the thing 1982 is psychological horror. It also has gore, that kind of horror, but the psychological horror works incredibly well. I love that that's in there. There's plenty of other stuff that, if you just want the gore, you can watch. But this, it definitely does, this was also a time when at least some studios were making these PG-13 horror movies. And most of the PG-13 horror movies that I've ever seen were not good. This one fares pretty well, in part because what it's depicting, that they manage to make it effective without showing too much. Because a lot of the PG-13 horror movies, the thing is, they can't show the thing that we expect from, if the, like, there's a lot of those PG-13 horror movies. If they were just rated R, they would show at least a little bit more. And that would be some of the most effective. So you leave the PG-13 horror movie feeling like, it was a little unsatisfying. It didn't quite go all the way. And yeah, of those, this is one of the better. I think that might pretty well cover. Yeah. I rate this 7 paranormal investigations of infamous hotel rooms out of 10 on the Shiver scale. And that brings us to the thoughts section, where I go over spoilers for the movie. So from here on out, if you haven't already watched the movie, I'm going to be spoiling absolutely everything. So I think I'm going to start with a couple of things from the short story. So in the short story, basically as soon as Mike has entered the room, it cuts to afterwards and notes that, they retrieved the recorder, and it was a little bit scorched, and you could hear, this and that on the tape. I am so glad they didn't try to replicate that in the movie, because that would just not have worked anywhere near as well. It worked in the short story, like maybe in part because I wasn't expecting it, because I only watched the movie. I watched the movie before listening to the short story. But yeah, in the short story, like the fact that suddenly it's just like, and then afterwards there's, because I mean, I knew about the fire because I watched the movie, but still. And the way that they instead, like if I recall correctly, and yeah, my memory, in the short story, there is, even accounting for length, there is less of him talking to the, we are told that afterwards you could listen to the recorder, and this is what he said. Whereas in the movie, we actually see him record stuff, and that's such a great way to still have this element and have it be very effective, because there is a point where he rewinds it and listens back to the tape, and suddenly, like, no, there was never a window, after all the stuff with the window. So very effective on that. I think I'm going to talk briefly about the endings. So the short story has him pulled out in time, and he suffered burns, but he's okay. They don't really go too much into the burns in the film, which might be a PG-13. I can imagine you can't get away with that on a PG-13. And yeah, the theatrical version of this film feels like they lost their nerve at the last moment, which I wouldn't rule out. It might be what happened. I forget what the plan was with the endings. And I do appreciate that they did keep because, like, let's see. There's the thing about how, what's the thing? There was something about the recorder at the end of the short story. And, in the film, there's two versions of the ending. If I recall correctly, the theatrical cuts version, she hears their daughter too. There's a deleted alternate version on the disc where it's only him hearing it. And the, let's see, the theatrical is the one where it cuts to Olin smiling. Like, and I think he even says, nicely done, Mr. Enslin, or something like that, And some have interpreted it as he was the one who sent it. Others have, it being the postcard. Others have, he's like, trying to destroy the room. Some have gone as far as saying, oh, he's like an angel. Would an angel say, damn it to hell? I don't know. Christians, let me know. But I don't know. I just feel like that's pushing it. I think he's just a person who hates what has happened, hates what this room is doing to people, But yeah, others have interpreted it as the room sent it, which I definitely think the director's cut ending might help back up the idea that the room sent it. Drawing in victims. It apparently, impersonates Mike to get Lily to come to the room, getting another victim. So you could easily see, because he would respond to a postcard that says, don't stay in 1408. Whereas she would respond to him calling and saying, I need your help. I'm in 1408. If she got that postcard, she'd be like, okay, whatever, weird flex, but okay, toss it in the bin, But let's see. I think that might be more or less what I had to say about the endings. But yeah, so the director's cut, he dies in the fire. We see the funeral and everything. The room didn't think that he'd be able to kill it. The room managed to claim him, but he got it too. I think that, could be evidence for it sending the postcard. I'm fine with the theory that Olin sent it. It's just the angel angle that I, yeah. I think, I mean, I definitely think he could play an angel I'd like an angel that yeah, he's great. Love him in everything I've seen him in, literally. Anyway, yes. So the director's cut. He dies in the fire. There's a funeral where Olin tries to hand over the personal belongings, including the recorder. He listens to a little of it. She's on the, daughter's on the tape. And then he adjusts his mirror and sees sees Mike there behind him. And he's like, well, did you order extra crispy or not? And, he realizes, oh, I was just seeing things. I will say, that's one thing about the ending that I don't love. I still prefer the overall director's cut ending to the theatrical, but it feels a little like, okay, why would he appear like that? And is that like a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It feels like a studio note, honestly, but after that, we see we see Mike in room 1408, and he hears his daughter, and so he walks towards the door and sort of disappears. And I definitely think that it works better to have, it's not the same as the short story, but if you can't show the burns, and they I guess struggle to convey, it's just not quite as bittersweet of an ending in visual form. For some reason, it worked really well in the short story, but in the film, I definitely think it works better that he ends up dead, but he took the room with him. There's that line about how many spirits have you crushed, and he says, I have lived selfishly. He redeems himself. He does one right thing, and he's reunited with his daughter. Everybody dies, Daddy. Will we be together? Like the whole thing. And I appreciate. Okay, so seemingly their souls are now tied to the room, but he's still with her. And there's a sort of resigned quality to the way that he moves there at the end. I think he even says something like, right, I'm coming, or something. Like, he doesn't seem happy, so it's bittersweet. He gets to be with her for eternity, but maybe he would have liked to go on living for some more. And I am not going to discuss too much. I'm in favor of euthanasia. I still haven't made up my mind on, like, okay, if someone in your life is thinking about committing suicide, it doesn't have to be you that talks to them. Maybe you can get someone, perhaps even a professional, to talk to them. But, if someone commits suicide, I definitely think they should have really thought it all through and been offered help, because there are a number of cases where, you look at like what someone wrote in their suicide note, and like you think maybe we could do something to save someone else who's feeling the same way, because some of the time, okay, I'm absolutely not judging people who commit suicide. I really can't stand when people judge those who commit suicide. I mean that sometimes, some of what's in some of these suicide notes, it is stuff that, yeah, if someone who, they're hypothetically, in the future, we can do more to make sure that, for example, one of the things is like community. A lot of them, they feel alone with what they're going through. And it can help if they are able to communicate with others who are going through the same thing. Maybe someone, a therapist or something. So I am not saying one way or the other. about, Mike, because he essentially does commit suicide, as the room wanted him to. And the movie has, it's a bittersweet thing of, maybe he, he was able to destroy the room, and maybe that's, you know, maybe it took someone like him to, make that, yeah. Let's see, I think, because that's the thing, like, ultimately, he beats the room, he beats the room a little too easily in the theatrical cut. The fact that, he went through trauma there. He was re-traumatized by, the ghost of his daughter, but he didn't actually lose that much, which, again, in the short story handles it well. The fact that he does have these burns, if you confront evil, it will leave a permanent mark on you, is one of the themes there. And, it is pretty wild that you can have, like, the movie, does have people commit suicide. It just doesn't show it in a lot of detail, but you can't have someone have visible burns. Anyway, not talking to you, Monty. But let's see. There was one more thing I wanted to say about the ending before moving on. Let's see. Hypothetically, like, if let's say that there had been two people in 1408, and in order to get out, Mike had to kill the other one, then I think it would feel like, okay, let's see, if it's someone close to him, if it's someone that's where it's really going to haunt him that he killed him, but I mean, other than that, it's kind of like, okay, so he went in room 1408, stayed there for a while, and then was able to leave. Like, he's reminded of stuff that happened in the past that, he's trying to run away from. He sees a glimpse of his future through his father. That's basically it. He feels like he can't leave, and then he's later able to leave. That's just not that. It's not quite enough, in my opinion. Yeah, I think that might be the overall. So yeah, scene by scene. So I think they do a really good job there at the start of this contrast of, he's driving to this, supposedly haunted house, and because it's such a small place, he accidentally drives too far. This is not a road well traveled or something. And he ends up finding the place, and, it's pouring rain, and it's, it's scary, and he goes up, and they're like, oh, that's where she hanged herself. And he's like, can I just get the room? I'm soaking wet. It's been a long drive. Please just let me, And he goes in there, and it's like, oh, creepy. And then in the morning, it's like, this seems fine, And he, like, gives it a rating, and that's basically it. He didn't encounter any ghosts. And this was apparently, in the commentary track, they talk about, originally there was scary stuff there was like a haunting in there. And later they realized, oh wait, let's save the hauntings for 1408. He genuinely doesn't encounter anything supernatural that we see, at least. And I think that is the text. He has not encountered anything supernatural before 1408. And that's part of why, it's that thing of, like, on the one hand, he doesn't believe, so you would think it can't get a hold of him as hard. Like, hypothetically, if you're walking through a dark room that you haven't traveled when there was light, in your mind, it's basically like a minefield. Not necessarily literally. Whereas, like, sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night, not turn on a light, and just walk, through my home. There's just, with just barely enough light to see. And I'm not thinking, oh, there's going to be something dangerous here in a dark area that I'm moving through. No, I've moved through it so many times, you know. So hypothetically, the fact that he's a non-believer should shield him, but at the same time, it also means he's not prepared for it the way that someone, you know, think of it like the first time versus the 50th time that a homicide detective walks onto one of his crime scenes, you know? It's one he's investigating, not one he caused. And let's see, I think yeah, and you know, I forget exactly when in the movie it happens, but at some point, you know, he says something like, "Well, you know, they see a boost to, you know, the more people will go stay at the hotel because I wrote about it." You know, it put it on the map, much like the monorail, and that you know, the fact that they show, you know, him struggling to even find the place because it's so you know, yeah, this guy who comes from LA, or wait, was it New York that he, right now I actually don't even remember where it was. I think it was LA. Yeah, because he's like surfing. Yeah, you know, he's this LA guy going to this small town to stay at this, you know, middle of nowhere little place, and you know, he gives them a review and they're gonna see more business, and he's gonna make some money off selling this crappy book, you know. I think that brings us to, yeah, so it's there's some actual fun, some humor in the book signing. You know, he goes to the guy and he's like, I'm here for the book signing. And he's like, oh yeah, sure, it's starting soon. No, like, dude, I'm the guy. You know, he holds it up, he even makes the same faces on the cover of the magazine, and you know, the guy's like, oh, I'll get people assembled. You know, he makes the announcement to really draw people in, and then we see Mike sitting there, and like, you know, then it cuts to the crowd, and there's like three people there, you know, just wonderful little thing. And they talk about that a little in the commentary track. That's they've had experiences like that, you know, where very few people will actually show up to that sort of thing. And yeah, the sort of playful energy and yet like tired delivery. Not let's see. The character is tired. I mean, the actor is not, doesn't feel like he's phoning it in, but the character's like, nobody ever asked me what the scariest place I've ever been to is. Oh God, why do I do this? Is this really making me that much money? Okay, let's just get it over with, you know. That was a great, like, because he even says the yeah, he says nobody's ever asked me that, but the way he's delivering it, there's not that sort of, yeah, you know, I've seen a little bit of footage of Stephen King answering questions on writing, you know, where like, yeah, you know, he likes to talk about this stuff, you know, he has a passion for it, and here we're seeing, you know, very much like, in a way, you know, I talk about how Mike is a self-insert. In a way, it's like King, and I appreciate he didn't write the movie, but I mean the way they're expressing, you know, they're exploring. King, you know, like, uh, King might worry about ending up like that, you know, no longer caring, you know, and yeah. Let's see. So yeah, he signs a couple of them, and then he goes. Let's see. Yeah. You know, one of them comes up and is like, you know, I found a copy of your old book, you know, and we have that little thing about, you know, I found it on eBay, and he's like, well, how much was he going for? And she's like, there weren't that many offers, you know, just like, yeah, because this is what he's been reduced to. You know, he hasn't written like a bestseller, like a book in years, you know. And we have the thing about, you know, was the relationship to the father real? And he just says no, and signs it, and that's it. And like, yeah, we can tell. Maybe it was. Maybe he's just not super happy about like bearing his heart and soul to this stranger, even if she likes his writing. He and that's again like Stephen King has talked about how some of his writing is essentially like, well, it's not, maybe it's something he experienced, maybe it's something he's personally worried might happen, something like that. So yeah, Mike, the Stephen King self-insert, once wrote a book that was very inspired by his own life. And yeah, I mean, I guess it's dark enough. That's got to be fireworks. I don't even know if the microphone is picking it up, but yeah, there's someone's definitely doing fireworks. Anyway, yeah. So let's see, we have the yeah. So he goes. I think this is when he goes surfing, and we have the setup for the later fake out. He gets knocked out by a wave and wakes up on the beach. And they do a good job of the setup and payoff is quite strong throughout the movie. You remember him being knocked out by a wave, so later when we see it, like and that's also, they talk about in the commentary track, people are watching it thinking like, oh, really, are we, was it all a dream? And then realize, oh, it's a fake out, and the idea is for us to get excited about it. Obviously, if you've watched the movie, you probably already realized what I was talking about in the review. Yeah, that's the scene I'm talking about that went on, the chunk of the movie that went on for too long. I get that they needed to spend some time on it in order for it to be an effective fake out, and I think there's some great stuff in the fake out. I appreciate the character development, character exploration, but ultimately it is, yeah. I think if it, again, if this was a 42-minute Twilight Zone episode and a few minutes of that were devoted to a fake out, I think it would be less annoying. But it goes on for just a little bit long, And yeah, so he's going over his mail and finds the "Don't stay in 1408" with no return, address. And yeah, so he calls the I want to say editor, publisher, something like that. And I do that. He's another fun character. Yeah, King's characters. Yeah, I don't think he appears in the short story. The short story is very much just he talks to Olin, gets to go to the room, spend some time in the room, and there's a little bit of after. What yeah, afterwards. And yeah, anyway, it's a very it's the kind of character that King would write. There's so yeah, and it is just the dynamic between them. And he brings in a lawyer, and he's like, okay, be a little careful with this guy, a little sensitive or something like that. And then yeah, the way they talk, and they find oh, he can use this, and it's pretty ridiculous to they were going to use like a civil rights law to force just them to force the hotel to let him stay in 1408. Yeah, wasn't made for white guys with a massive ego, but that's of course also what the movie is saying. It's saying like, can you believe this jerk? Which I really appreciate, that they don't have him just be unbearable throughout. And it is also fun. They made good use of that for the trailer as well. When he calls and says, "I'd like to stay in 1408. That room's occupied," and he's like, "I didn't say when. I didn't say Simon Says." And I think that does bring +2. Yeah, and you know, so he sends away the lawyer, and he's like, so you're gonna talk to Lily? And he's like, no, it's, you know, I don't want to open old wounds. Yeah, I will talk more about that later in the video. But again, good bit of setup and payoff. Right, and I'm not gonna note every single time that they have numbers that add up to 13, because, like, okay, it's, you know, at least it's, the movie's not anywhere near, it's, you know, the movie, the number 23 is egregious. This movie is not. I appreciate them. You know, there's a lot of enthusiasm on display in having every single number you encounter in the movie. Like, there's at least one point where it's like, well, okay, technically not this number, but that number is Fahrenheit. If you convert it to Celsius, it adds up to 13. You know, it's like, okay, we get it. You know, just calm down. I think, you know, they stop short of overwriting the, you know, it's not an Andrew Niccol script. I've talked about before. Big fan of his movies. I do think that he's his own worst enemy. I think some of the stuff in, what was it called again? In Time, I think, the movie about, yeah, you know, where metaphor for capitalism, with time as currency, you know, and where he'll like have, like, he changes clean your clock from, like, you know, in real life, clean someone's clock is to like punch them, to knock them out, or something along those lines. In that movie, clean someone's clock basically means to kill them, take all of the time in the world that they have and kill them. And it's just difficult to take seriously when you're using, like, I'm sorry, but clean someone's clock. Like, I get it, it's because of the clock symbolism, you know, but like, does anybody still say clean someone's clock? I think that's like, you know, I don't know, 40s or 50s kind of saying, you know, like if I heard Bogey say it, I'd be like, okay, that sounds natural. But anyway, moving on. Um, I will do more Andrew Niccol videos. Movie review videos. Yeah, there we go. I think that pretty well gets us to the hotel. Right, I like one deleted scene that I wouldn't have minded them putting back in. When he when he goes from LA to New York, there's a deleted scene of him flying, and it's a director cameo. You know, very Hitchcock Ian. So yeah, that was fun. Now let's see. I think pretty well brings us to the, yeah. So he arrives at the hotel. You know, he's offered to take. You know, can I take your bags? And later we see that guy in, you know, in the fake out. And yeah, so he talks to, you know, the woman at the desk, and, you know, okay, so we got to get, you know, management involved. And Olin comes in, and I love the way the camera, you know, like spins around the two of them as there is this tension, you know, because immediately, like, okay, Olin definitely does not want him in 1408, but he really, really badly wants to stay there, you know? And yeah, they end up in his office, and just wonderful performances, you know. The I love the thing about, you know, oh, I don't smoke anymore. This is, you know, in case of nuclear war, which I hear was like a thing during like the Cold War. You know, just make sure you have one last smoke in case all the bombs go off, kind of thing. You know, and then Olin's like, "Would you drink?" And he's like, "Of course I drink. I told you I'm a writer." And again, that's not. Oh, hold on. Is that in the book? Maybe there is a line equivalent to that in the book, but certainly it feels like the kind of line King would put in the mouth of a self-insert character. And they, you know, we're introduced to the liquor, which, you know, he ends up turning into a Molotov cocktail. So very nicely done. And it's the kind of thing of like, yeah, you know, a bottle of liquor that big and old, you're not going to just swig it. Like, hypothetically, let's say that he just gave him a beer or something, would there be that much left by the end of an hour, considering he says, like, oh yeah, he drinks, he's a writer. But this other, I forget the name, but that liquor bottle, there would still be a lot left. And they do reminders, not only is it set up there and he gets to take it into the room, it's one of the few things he takes into the room. Later, he's like, was it poisoned? And let's see, we have the thing about, yeah, at one point he's like pouring it on his head and face, so like every so often we go back to it, and yeah, like there's enough in there that it could work as a Molotov cocktail, because he never drinks too much of it, nor does he pour it out like on the floor or something, and yeah, just the back and forth in the office of, Olin offering all this other stuff, and Mike keeps insisting. And I do love that by the end, like when you think back to it or when you rewatch, technically, yeah, you could read it as Olin is like the whole time thinking, if I don't tell him no, he might not do it. But if I, I know his type. He's a contrarian. He's going to keep insisting, and eventually, as long as I put up enough of a fight, eventually I'll just say, okay, fine, go ahead and do it. And he won't realize that I, hypothetically maybe set the card, or at the very least want him in there, like maybe the room every so often sends out something to call someone in. Maybe sometimes that person ends up giving up because there's, Olin keeps, or maybe also his predecessor, hypothetically. And, Olin is like checking, like he knows his writing also, but he still has to make sure, okay, this guy has to really want it, because otherwise he might, suicide without destroying the room. So yeah. And the thing about, I really loved your other book, and he gets the title wrong, which is a fun little, that's got to be so frustrating for authors, and it's people in media in general, someone getting the title wrong, because like, if yeah, titles is one of those things that sometimes people will like go really spend a lot of time thinking about perfecting, and the thing about, I thought the dad was an asshole. He was. So again, reminder, he has a strained relationship with his father, Mike does. And yeah, they talk about the details, and there's some really great stuff there. And I love that several of them end up appearing in 1408. You have the woman, you have the guy with the glasses, not that guy with glasses, but the other guy with glasses, up in the vent. And you have the let's see, the one that at first appears across the street and then in 1408. Yeah, really, really nicely done, setting that up and explaining it, and it doesn't feel too exposition-y, because they're talking about it, and some of it is Mike proving that he's done his homework. Some of it is him learning new things, in part by Olin talking about it, and yeah, the thing about, how Mike wonderfully passive aggressively, like they're talking about the deaths, and so Mike, turns on the recorder, or maybe just holds it up. I guess it might have already been on. Holds it up to his mouth and says, "Director Olin says the facts," as if, just, yeah. Love that little bit of passive aggressive. That is a passive aggressive power move. That will there's a very high crit chance So keep that one in your deck. That is like, I don't think I could pull it off personally, but it must be super satisfying to just, yeah. Anyway, I think that pretty well brings us to, so yeah, and they talk about, oh no, we make sure the room is clean, but this one woman, and she wasn't in there for very long, but she still, what was it, cut her eyes out or something like that. And yeah, so he goes to the room, and he's still doing like passive aggressive. He's like, can I still have those Knicks tickets? Just like he essentially taking a victory lap. It's like, okay, dude, you won, stop being a jerk. And yeah, Olin doesn't go close to the room except for cleaning time. And so Mike goes in. We get the shot. I do wish they had done it with practical effects, because it is a very effective shot of the lock, the tumbler, and lock tumbler. Anyway, yeah, and they yeah. So he enters the room, and yeah, he acknowledges, oh wait, it's actually not that. Like, it's certain little things feel a little wrong, but it's not like hugely, it's not overwhelming. And that, of course, tells us it's coming, though, because it's a good idea to acknowledge, to let the audience know, yeah, don't worry about it. Like, we're not there yet. It's yeah. Let's see, and yeah, early on he thinks, oh, there's someone in the room, so he like runs around and tries to find. And let's see, we have the um yeah, and then there's the thing about the yeah, so he's like, oh, it's so hot in here, so he opens a window. He's gonna end up regretting that, and calls. And they're like, are you ready to check out? Because like nobody lasts very long inside. And he makes reference to the fact that because he thinks that one of them snuck in. Snuck, it's a word. And was like, and I'm sure the person on the other end is either like, what is he talking about, or like, yeah, sure, we're the ones doing it, not the room that we told you was haunted, being haunted, whatever. But he doesn't say it's hot in here. Nor does he wrap it. He says the room's on fire, planting in our minds, because that's a very specific way to say it. And I'm not saying it's, that's the wonderful thing. Some people would say that in real life, because he's obviously using exaggeration to because he wants them to send someone as soon as possible. He wants this fixed, so he's not just, and he's a little bit of a jerk. We already knew that, so he's being very, yeah. But yeah, it plants the image in our head of the room, because we're thinking, yeah, okay, it's not actually on fire, dude, calm down. And later on, he sets it on fire. But yeah, we're sending someone up immediately. Really? Okay. And the yeah, there's some more scary stuff, and then a knock at the door, and he's like, oh right, or someone. There's a wonderful little like, yeah, this is still, we're not like at 11 yet, but it's starting to, but oh, there's still a little bit of real life stuff, and it's like, I'm not entering that room. I'll talk you through it. Even someone like you is smart enough to fix it. And he talks him through fixing it. And yeah, he's like, oh, you're amazing. I want to give you a tip. He walks over to the door and sees the guy already, having gone far away. And he closes the door, And in the director's cut, he never opens that door again, you know. Or I guess he doesn't open the door in any of the endings that are on the DVD. Firefighters do, I guess. But yeah, you know, yes. Oh, right. Oh, I can't believe I forgot. So wonderful when he goes up there and he's just looking for the room, and he accidentally walks all the way past and back to the elevator, you know. And like you could read it as, oh, he's distracted, you know, he's looking at all these, you know, dead bodies, which is also like, you want to get that away from the woman in white. That is wonderful. That's actually how she's credited, which is of course, you know, reference to famous ghosts. But yeah, you know, he ends up finding the room, but yeah, the room is already playing tricks on his mind, with his mind, whatever. And yeah, so once he closes the door, and you know, the temperature is back to where it should be, and that's also, you know, yeah, the room temperature changes are yeah, very very nicely done. Let's see. Then we have the yeah, I think that's when um the radio plays, you know, and he's like, Sonny and Cher again, but I thought I conquered the time loop. Seriously though, yeah, Carpenter's, I understand it's frequently used for weddings, which I get, you know, it's like, we've only just begun to live, you know, so yeah, that is a fun way to, because it's also the room saying, I can do this all day. Like, dude, don't even, you seriously testing me right now? I got some stuff up my sleeve. Don't even, like, dude, take a seat. This is gonna take a while, you know. That's a very and it's a sort of a ironic use of music, you know, because it's not an inherently unpleasant song, arguably. Seriously though, no. It's a pleasant song, but when it's in this situation, it's obviously unpleasant. Yeah, I think that pretty well brings us to the so yeah, this is when he when the window slams down hard on his hands, you know. And so he calls and he's saying, you know, okay, you know, help me here. And you know, it's one of those things, in my opinion, it is underrated how much horror you can mine from such things as phones. It doesn't have to be a phone, it can be a radio. Because there is just something about being able to hear someone as if they're next to you, but you can't see them. You know, I mean, look at, a lot of people love the camera phone, you know, or the video call feature. That's what I'm talking about, you know, because it's just like, you like to be able to see the person you're talking to a lot of the time, not always. And yeah, you know, because it's the same voice. It sounds like it's the same person, but no, it's the room screwing with him, you know, and saying things that is like, what, you know, like a sandwich and French fries, and that was something he actually saw on his way into the room, you know. So it's like, oh, it's like using his recent memories, and later it digs deeper and uses more, you know, buried memories to torment him. Yeah, I think that pretty well brings us to the let's see. Um I think, what was the other thing? I feel like there was at least one more thing there. I thought they did a good job on the blood. You know, he tries to get out, and he gets blood on the door. He even punches the door. You know, and that is such a great, you know, he has to unlock it. So he, you know, master of unlocking, puts the key in, and like, it swallows the key, you know, and it's a simple thing. It's not difficult to do that gag. You just gotta have like a door set up for that. But it works, you know. Like imagine being locked in a room, and then when you try to unlock it, the key just disappears into the lock, you know. And this is when, you know, stuff starts happening where it's like, okay, he has to admit this is haunted, you know. Oh, right. Also, like when he, like at one point he like turns off the lights and he uses the I forget what it's called, but a black light maybe, you know. He holds that over and sees the bloodied, you know, the stains from the people who suicided. Also, you know, he tries to open the door by, you know, with the knob, and then the knob, you know, yeah, he broke the knob. Ouch, there's a lot of nerve endings there. And yeah, let's see, the timer, you know, the digital timer, you know, no one's ever lasted more than an hour. And let's see, they talk about that on the commentary track, the fact that, you know, you can't really fake, you have to make sure the timer is right in each shot. And they did a really great job on that. And it's also it's, you know, the fact that something electrical is misbehaving is also creepy, you know. I gotta admit, when I watched Pulse, you know, the 80s, the American 80s movie called Pulse, I liked it substantially better than Phaelus did. I was really, really scared by it, as like a kid, early teenager, you know, watched that movie multiple times. Um, and yeah, like there is just something to, you know, yeah, every so often we look at the timer and it's like, you know, in that amount of time, you know, when that timer reaches zero, he's going to suicide. And it also, like, it's this very effective thing of like, at the same time we're thinking, oh no, that's how little time he has left before suicide, but at the same time we're thinking, there's that much time left, how much more is he going to be tortured, you know. And near the end of the movie it reaches zero, and then it just starts over, you know. And the room goes back to the way it was at the start of the hour. And yeah, you know, and the phone voice even says, we can do this forever, you know, it's up to you. And I think, does that bring us to the let's see. So yeah, you know, he can't really get you know, he can't get anything out of the on the phone. And I love it's effectively creepy the way that, yeah, you know, the voice kind of just stays more or less the same. It has this, you know, slightly neutral, sort of chipper kind of, you know, service worker, you know, who knows they have to, you know, the person on the other end has to really be, you know, it has to be appealing to them, you know. And, you know, even as she's saying like genuinely horrible things, you know, about like how, well, go ahead and kill yourself. And I think this is when he looks out the window, and it's such a great, the window is one of the best. um you know, they say that a room's window is actually the eyes to the soul, and they get so much out of this window, I swear. So yeah, he looks out and there's someone right across, you know. So he starts waving his arms, and the person seems to notice and stand up and look. And then after a little while, he realizes, dude, stop mimicking me, you know. And he holds up the light and sees, you know, it's the introduction of his evil twin. And him, I also think they got, you know, some really great stuff out of. He appears to talk her into going into the room, um, even though she'll only get there shortly after he's apparently suicided. If, you know, the hour is up, which means she'll go through this torment and suicide as well. I appreciate that part of the fear here is that she'll die. And, it's one of those things. She's not a very detailed character. She kind of exists as someone that he misses, but that's it. He regrets hurting her, but she doesn't really have much, yeah. But yeah, the fact that it is in part the fear that this room will kill kill this innocent woman who hasn't done anything wrong. Like, he at least, like, he ignored warnings. She hasn't been warned. She has no idea what that, room does. I don't believe for a second that she would enter it if she thought that it would end in her suicide. She doesn't seem suicidal at all, and that's also, I think an argument could be made that he is behaving in a self-destructive manner and has done for years. Like, is one of those things. I mean, if you try to stay in enough supposedly haunted places, I mean, hypothetically, maybe one is actually haunted. I don't believe in the supernatural. I just think it makes for very compelling fiction. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's kind of like if you go up to enough wrestlers and say to their face on camera that wrestling is fake, maybe eventually one of them will attack you. Yeah. Jesse Waters was always a jackass. Seriously, that is like just holy crap. Who does that? Anyway, I mean, I'm not like a wrestling fan, but I would never say to their face while on camera. Yeah, moving on. Yeah, and his evil twin is attacked across the street, and then he's attacked. And the way that they edit it to where, like, it becomes clear after a few seconds, oh, he's not actually there, very, very effectively done. And that's apparently like this really talented what was it, martial artist or something, and he like helped John Cusack on another movie, and John Cusack sang his praises, so he really wanted him in the movie, and he's very effective. Like, it's a genuinely scary bit when he's attacking him like that. Right. I also love one of the first scares. Just jumping slightly back. One of the first scares is the painting of like a ship in um right, and let's see. Yeah, the ship. Yeah, so the ship is like, it's stormy at sea, and the painting starts out hanging straight, and then it gets a little crooked. Huh. Almost as if the ship at sea is a real physical thing rather than a painting, and it's affecting how the frame is because of this harsh weather, the perfect storm. And that's another thing that I love. I can be a little bit of a mark for when you have like a painting that is like at first not super creepy, like, okay, yeah, it's he even says like this is kind of banal, and then like we actually see the ship move, and very nicely animated. I don't think that was CG. I think that was just good old-fashioned 2D animation. And there's a bit where we see the martial artist killer guy on the ship, and the other painting also changes, and the painting of the woman and the kids, some of that is right out of the short story. For example, the bared breast and the dripping blood. Yeah, I think that pretty well gets us to right. I think around this part is when so yeah, he the very next room has the woman in white and the baby, and he and he notes like, another place we stay where the walls are thin, again setting up. And we saw her go into the room right next to him now, and we hear the baby crying through the wall, and he notes thin walls, and it's like, oh right, I can get her to help me, so he bangs on the wall, and the crying baby gets louder and louder, and it gets to this cacophonous level, just horrifying. And yeah, like in that's a great bit of sound design. They push it not quite far enough that we're like stop that we stop watching the movie, but it's so bad that it is like upsetting, in the way that we want from horror media. And of course, he does have issues with, later when he goes through the vent and looks down, the lady in white is suddenly Lillian, and it's his kid. He lost his kid, and he can't really take it. So the baby crying is, hinting towards that, although of course she wasn't a baby when she died. But like he legit ends up on the floor, like holding his ears, because the sound is so horrible. And of course there is an evolutionary reason for us to hate the sound of crying babies. Famously, if a baby cries for long enough, eventually it turns into a supernatural evil being and sucks your soul out. But I think, are we at the point where he? Okay, I'll talk about it here. So yeah, he notes, the distance between the windows isn't too bad. I guess I could go on the ledge. And again, like the window stuff is just so good. So he crawls out and starts moving across slowly, carefully, eventually, occasionally looking down. It's like, oh, he walks over, and it's like, I should have walked far enough. And he looks, and there's just wall the whole way. And the camera pulls out, this impossible camera move, pulls way far out. And there's only the window he came out of, and that's it, And so he has to go back, of course. And as soon as he gets back to the window, she shows up and starts attacking, and it's like, oh crap, is he going to fall? And just eventually he manages to and then the window, it's like, oh no, is it going to close? Is he going to be able to open the window? Is he going to stand out there until eventually he just can't, like, stay until he can't no more, But he manages to get in. Or also, like, when he throws, like, a lamp, I think it is, to the street, and it just blips out of existence before hitting, That might also have been CG, and that's a good use of it. Yeah, I think certainly computer effect of some kind. Anyway, I think that brings us to so yeah. At one point, he notices like this like hole in the wall, and like liquid is pouring, and it's like, that hole, like, I don't know. I mean, I guess hypothetically I could make the hole bigger, but I really don't want to end up in Silent Hill for the Room. Honestly, that game, it grew on me like a tumor. Yes, I think that pretty well brings us to the... Is this when the... let's see. Yeah, okay, some of this is just going to be out of order. But yeah, he hears, noise and follows, and, suddenly the bathroom is like this horrible place that he, left his father. And you have the thing about, what you are, I was. What I am, you will be. Just very, very effective. And yeah, a lot of people who grew up with abusive parents fear that they themselves will become abusive. And of course, there's also the element of, how horrible a lot of retirement homes are, sadly. Some More News did a really excellent video on that. Yeah, I think... Right, and I think also one of the things, you can read multiple things into that line by his father. I think it's also the fact that, you know, never mind. That doesn't make sense. We're moving on. We're gonna pretend like I didn't brain fart. I do think the actor who plays the father does a really solid job. He doesn't get to play Happy very much in the movie, but he does a really great job when he does. In the fake out. And yeah, like he does genuinely, he feels like a only slightly exaggerated version of what the guy probably is in real life, kind of thing. It doesn't feel, because it's Mike being reminded of this bad experience, but they don't push it to the level where it feels like, okay, this is just, there's no way that the real person was anything like this. Let's see. I think, does that bring us to, let's see, we have the, yeah, let's talk about, so he, there's the, yeah, he realized about the vent, and that was also, he noticed it almost right away after entering the room. He looks up at it, and like, and later he tries to escape through it. Makes a lot of sense. So, he's crawling through it, and it's also, it's impossible as far as the exact, the way he can crawl around in it doesn't make sense. And he crawls for a while and then just ends up, back where he started, even though, like, yeah. Right. I also love the "you are here," the one that shows, no, there's nothing other than this room, you will never leave this room alive, kind of thing. But yeah, so he's crawling around the vent, looks down one, sees John McClane in a rap battle, and he's like, okay, I don't want to, that's none of my business. Crawls another direction, ends up finding that guy, you know, the glasses, and yeah, it's like, has he been rotting up here for all these years, and so we think, well, I don't know, I guess maybe Mike just has to find another path to get, and then he starts moving, and it's like, nope, um i'm a I'm gonna get out of here. And he's like, help me, just so messed up. And he grabs onto to Mike's foot, and that's also, like, it already felt cramped and claustrophobic before, but now that he's also being chased, and there's a part where Mike gets a little bit ahead, and then we do still see the other guy crawling, like, nope, he's trying to get to him. And at one point, like, Mike genuinely surprises, the guy in the glasses. Like, his jaw drops. And then he kicks him again, and the skull just like, oh, wow, that is so messed up. And I like, when he falls through and lands, like, on the table, and he's like, how nice to be back. Because, yeah, maybe there was something worse than being stuck in the room. Yeah, and I think, yeah, let's talk about, so at one point, like, it starts getting extremely cold, like freezing, and he, like, gets some, he starts, like, burning, these pieces of paper that he figures, well, this might be a better, way to, yeah. That wasn't even the big, the world might end like this kind of disaster flick that he appeared in around this time in his career. That felt very The Day After Tomorrow to me. Let's see. I think that does bring us to, I guess I don't have much more to say about that bit. I do really appreciate the way that, because, once so he's locked in this room. Well, extreme temperature, it could be extremely hot, it could be extremely cold. Right, the part where, so the TV comes on, and it's a home video, it's not even one of America's Funniest, and he sees, his daughter, and it's this wonderful, because again, like, there's this bittersweet quality to it, because like it's a happy memory and he's happy to see it again, but it's disturbing because he hasn't properly grieved yet. He keeps putting that off. It's been years. I forget if they ever say exactly how many, but Lillian does say, I don't hear from you for years after Katie's done, so yeah. And the home video, it's the kind of thing that a family might shoot. It's like, who's the ugliest person in the world? We're all gonna pull a face on camera. It's like, isn't that just the worst? And she gets so close to the camera, and he touches the screen. She's reacting in the footage as if she can tell that he's there. That's very disturbing, and again, bittersweet, like, because he does want to, like, he would do anything to have her back, very, very nicely done, because it's like, oh yeah, she's going to turn off the camera because the competition's over, the judges have made their ruling. If you are displeased with the judge's final ruling, there is an appeals process, but there's no reason to go on filming. And right, if you're not already subscribed to Jeannie Collects, the channel did a really fun video recently of a reading of, let's see, I think it's called Replying to an Email Not Intended for Me, or something like that. Right, and of course, Matt Rose continues to really deliver. Loved the video about changing the context, especially the I miss everyone, yeah, and the rock and metal one, yeah. Moving on, yeah, so let's see, right, there's a little bit more I wanted to say about so his hand gets bloodied, and he tries to rinse it, of course, and he uses a towel on it and everything, and then the water gets scalding. And that again is like, sometimes it just works better to have a scare like that, because listen, not everyone, a lot of us have been fortunate enough to never have been scolded ourselves, but like, we've probably had an experience where scalding hot water was near us, like, I think a lot of us can remember, if like, if you grew up in a family that made soup or boiled eggs or that sort of thing in pot, not the kind that gets you high, and the yeah, you maybe remember one of your parents saying, "Don't touch that, the water is scalding hot." So like, we all understand the concept, and like, though it's this haunting thing, yeah, we get, like, we would definitely not want to experience that ourselves, kind of thing, very, very nicely done on that. So let's see, then we have so yeah, he does manage to end up turning it off, though it seems like even the metal, the I don't remember what it's called, but the thing that you turn turn off a faucet. Even that is scalding hot. So very nicely done. And the fact that that happens fairly early, he spends most of this movie with a bloodied, sore hand, And I think that pretty well gets us to the... Right, I don't think I mentioned, bears repeating, in the commentary track, they talk, somewhere on the DVD, whatever, they talk about how Cusack realized, oh, this is my best friend, for the recorder, and it shows. Yes, it really, I am very impressed by how well he plays this, considering, there's not another person there for him to react to. I think this might be around the time that we have the yeah. So let's see. His yeah. On the he managed to use the he's like, electricity. I could use my because it's a laptop. It runs on a battery. So he gets on that and he uses it to contact Lily. And yeah, she understandably is like, I don't hear from you for years, and he's like, I'm trapped in this horrible place. And she's like, you're always getting yourself trapped in horrible places, and she's like, listen, I got to deal with this. Can this wait until, later? And it's like, no, can't. And I kind of love that, and there's the thing about, I can be there in 15 minutes. And he's like, that's not going to be fast enough, because by then the room will have successfully driven him to suicide. And then his evil twin's like, 15 minutes, that's perfect. Such a wonderful. And I love that his evil twin actually says the kinds of things that he should be saying to her. I could always depend on you. It's the fact that, because like we call him the evil twin, and I get that from the commentary track. Is he evil, or is he just like the kind of reverse? Because like the Uno reverse version of Mike is the kind that would say, yeah, come to the room. It's fine if you also die. That's not something the real Mike would say. That's where he draws the line. But is it noteworthy, perhaps, that this other version of him is the one saying nice things to her? Because he's not super nice to her. I mean, I get it, considering the circumstances, but still, and you, like, note that when he says, come on, you got to come help me, and isn't being very patient or polite with her, she's not like, what are you doing? You're never like this. It's more of this resigned thing of like, that's Mike. It's been years, but still he's talking like, let's see. Yeah. And, he tries to get her, to talk to her. And that's also, seeing a double of yourself and it's behaving in a destructive way towards your loved ones. That's also, we all, like, at one point or another in our lives find ourselves thinking, am I hurting the people I love? Like, when I try to help, do I just make things worse? And the idea that there is someone who looks and sounds exactly like you out there that could lie to the people you love and say things to them that would hurt them because they think it's you, that's really, really upsetting. And yeah, I think there even is, yeah, is it the shadow self? I think there's like a psychological, there's a thing there that I can't recall the details of. Anyway, yeah, I think and yeah, so he tries to get her back on, and then the sprinkler goes, and it's like, oh no, blue screen of death, in which, like, someone who uses a computer a lot, that is very scary. Have seen that in real life, not recently, but it still haunts me. So that's also a nice little... I feel like there's probably, when this was in theaters, there was probably like a certain percentage of the audience who reacted especially intensely to seeing the blue screen of death, and everybody else was like, what are you doing? I don't know. I guess by now everybody uses a computer, or maybe more smartphone, but whatever. Some sort of device. Yeah. And then we have, it actually, the room starts to turn, and it's this wonderful thing of they actually built the set. Let's see, I forget if they had more than one set, but at least one set they had that literally, yeah, they had I think it's called a gimbal, and there's video of it, and like, yeah, when you just watch the movie, it feels like, oh, the room is like, and then you see the behind the scenes, it explains it, but while you're watching the movie, the illusion is so compelling, so convincing. Absolutely love that for them. And yeah, he at one point he like tries to walk against the, walk upwards in the room. There's also in the short story, there's a bit where the door is just slightly off, first one side then the other, and they sort of do that with the painting. They don't really do it with the door. I'm not sure it would have worked as well, but they do it with the tilting room like that. And yeah, we see the painting, and it's like, it really is like the painting is taking over the room essentially. And yeah, the crack widens, water pours out, and he hangs on for a little bit, but eventually, yeah, he goes under, and then he wakes up on the beach. And I've already said that this portion goes on too long, so I'll try to focus on some of the more positive stuff. I did think that it definitely needed at least some time there for it to really work, because if it was super short, it would just be like completely pointless. Um, I think it's effective for what it's doing. I don't know. It definitely needed something big there near the end, because like, okay, you have the burning of the room, but they don't spend that much time on that ultimately, and they can't, because if you have the room burning for a really long time and he isn't either rescued or killed by it, then it's like, okay, well, what are we doing here? Like, what stop this, it just becomes comical instead. But yeah, they definitely needed something big and a fake out. It is this thing of like, oh, will he ever get out? Oh, he got out. Oh, it was all a dream. Oh, yes, that wasn't real. The room really taking it to a huge extreme level. Right. I like so when he's climbing on the vent and he looks, he sees his father. The couple of lines there, the way that, yeah, because it is like, we're told, oh, the father was a real jerk, and, was the relationship real? And then we see, because like on some level, I think he's thinking, did I ruin my relationship with my own father? And to be clear, I'm not one of those people who think, yeah, and I know there's like apparently a bunch of parents whose kids went no contact, and the parents are like wallowing in self-pity, and then you hear details and you see, oh, like you alienated your own kid and now you're gonna go on the internet and whine about it, like, holy crap. So I'm not one of those people. I'm not saying, that, oh, it's probably the kid's fault. No, a lot of the time the kid really wants a positive relationship with their parent, but it is sometimes true that, yeah, offspring will say something horrible to their parents and ruin the relationship. And yeah, it's unclear if that is what happened, but I like that they're acknowledging, it's basically a visualization of, the room is bringing up that Mike on some level thinks, did I do this? Is this my fault? Which is, of course, one of the most, like, that's also something you see in suicide notes. People that commit suicide will sometimes express that they feel like they're making the world a worse place and it would be better if they were dead, and yeah, I really appreciate the way the movie goes into like what would make someone commit suicide. What is the thought process that leads to a suicide attempt? And I think, let's see. Yeah, I like that there are multiple scenes. He goes to a restaurant with her, but she can't stay in the city. And, at first he doesn't think He thinks it was real. He's like, in New York, and she's like, no, what are you talking about? LA. I am still listed as next of kin, so they called me, and here I am. I can't stay, but we can enjoy, a little bit. And we have the line, why did you leave? And he says, every time I looked at your face, every time I looked at you, I saw her face. And it is true. There are a lot. It ruins a lot of romantic relationships if something horrible happens to their offspring. It's not always death. And there's so much trauma that comes from someone looking at the face of someone they're related to and seeing the face of someone else who's maybe dead, or you know sometimes it's because their partner abandoned them and left them to raise their kid alone. Sadly, there are a number of men who abandon their female partners and leave behind a kid. And yeah, I think that does. Yeah, and he writes the book of that's also one of the deleted, one of the alternate endings is the script. Let's see, I think it was in the publisher's hands, which is also a decent enough. I will say, I think that might be better than scorched Mike in the back of the car kind of thing. But yeah, the idea that something survives the room, even if might not be Mike. Outlook is bleak, but yeah, and he like it's his dream. He gets to spend time with Lily again. He writes again something that's actually good, and this, the phone conversation with the publisher is great. And yeah, he's gonna mail the finished product, and then suddenly it's I want to say they're called bellboys, the guy who was gonna help with the bags, and then they tear down the mail room, and yeah, he's back in the room, and we even have they yeah there's suddenly a door there, and they talk about in it's DVD somewhere. They talk about they were worried about a door in the room, and then they put it there, and it's like, okay, this works so well. Fantastic bit of set design there. But yeah, he knocks on the door. He's like, so what is this? And in my experience, at that point, we're not laughing anymore. We're, earlier we were laughing at when he would make a joke, we would be like, that's pretty funny. But here it's like, what's happening? What next? And yeah, he like he knocks on it, and then the knob starts to turn. He's like, and then when he turns away, there's only there's no longer a door there, but yeah, it's this thing of like letting the evil in. He's still taunting. That's still his attitude, and so yeah, he is forced to re-experience her death. And yeah, um, she does such a good job. She's again, she's not asked to do. She's not given much to do. I mean, she's it's basically just she's either cute or sadly dying. That sort of thing. But she does do that really well. And oh god, the line, "Don't you love me anymore?" Just I'm not even a parent, and maybe that's apparent. That just cuts like a knife. Like, that's, oh god, yeah. And he's like, of course I still love you. You're not Mystique though, right? That was that other girl. And I don't know, you can't tell me there's not some resemblance there. But yeah, he let's see. Yeah, they hug, and she goes limp, and so yeah, she died again, and she turns to ash right in his arms, like, oh god. And also at one point he sees the coffin, the for the cremation, just and yeah, we get that flashback at one point with I realize this is incredibly out of order, but I think this whole system is out of order. But yeah, so he we see the there's the thing about, she says everybody dies, and that's such a devastating thing for someone of that age to say. She shouldn't experience this, and Lily says, oh, but when they're older, and we'll go to heaven. And it seems like at that point either Mike does believe, or he's at least thinking that it'll help. He's willing to not be, anti-theist, but later, she dies, and then, he says we shouldn't have filled her head with all those stories. Lily says, but she liked those stories, and that's a discussion that actually is had in that horrible situation that sadly does sometimes happen, where parents watch their little kid die. Yeah, should we tell them harsh truths, biological facts about death and decomposition, or should we try to fill them with hope? Because there's that thing, it's perfectly verbalized here. He says maybe she would have fought harder, maybe she would still be alive. And that, again, I don't think I'm the best to comment on it, but I appreciate the movie bringing up, because that is something you hear from real life cases where a kid died, the of something like that. I mean, yeah. Let's see. And the thing about, so basically, the yeah. Um, let's see. I think that pretty much brings us to right. And the deleted scenes during the bit where the room, where he goes back to the room because it's being torn down. Olin appeared and said, I told you, you can check out any time you want, but you can never leave. Yeah, I mean, I get wanting as much Sam Jackson as possible in the movie. I'm on board with that, in theory, on principle, but I do think it works better without. I do think that's all in the commentary track. They talk about, can we really, we were unsure if we could make it work with, Sam Jackson in the uh, um, liquor cabinet. What the crap is that thing called? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And yeah, at first it's just like, oh, you see him. Nope. At one point he is essentially there. Like, you see Cusack and the liquor bottles, and then you see a tiny little Olin standing there, and somehow it works. Somehow it doesn't wreck the tone. And I think, does that bring us to the yeah, and the way that he really confronts Mike in a way that Olin didn't. But yeah, this is again Mike's subconscious, this kind of surreal experience, and it again works really well with how Olin, like, it feels like this is what Olin might be like if he wasn't worried about, is Mike gonna go to the press and say, oh, the guy who runs this hotel was really, really rude to me, you shouldn't stay at that hotel, kind of thing, but without it becoming, like, there's a number of movies where Sam Jackson really goes, all the way in on the verbal aggression and such. And I don't think, I love it in those movies. I don't think it would have worked as well here. Like, imagine if this had been like, I think it's called Deep Blue Sea, the shark movie that he did. I don't think he did more than one shark movie. It works really well there, wouldn't have here. I feel like I've pretty much said what I wanted to say. Let's see. Right, I like the thing with, well, you could always check out. There's the express, way, and he sees the noose. And yeah, I don't know. No news is bad news. Good news. Well, yeah, I blew that. Yeah. I think that pretty much gets us to the... Yeah. Let's see. You have the... Yeah. So I like the bit where, so he... Yeah, he finishes his review into the recorder, and yeah, he gave it 10 out of 10 skulls, which is very nice for the guests that will not be staying in that room because you burnt it, you jerk. Yeesh. It's going to be a lot of FOMO. And I think that does... Yeah. It is like he says, I can't watch you die twice. You're not James Bond. The Chuds are gonna go absolutely hog. What they're gonna lose it if we recast you as Bond. And let's see. Right. So completely out of order, but I like the thing about, oh, you've done your homework. Did you know about the 22 natural deaths? The press didn't write about those, and that's also like, what? Like, so, and yeah, it's like, oh, there were like strokes and heart attacks in here, which, yeah, it's silly because, like, no matter where you go in the world, someone died there at some point. Do you realize how long we humans have been around? How much we've moved around the world? Like, no matter where you go, like, ideally we try to, like disinfect, clean so that the corpse bacteria don't, harm us. But like, that's essentially it. We can't, you'll never be able to find a place on Earth where no person has died nearby. That's just not a thing. But still, even though, logically it doesn't follow, yeah, we do find it uncomfortable to think about, oh, someone died here, so good use of it, taps into that anxiety. You know, a lot of our anxieties are not really rational. Maybe feelings are feelings because we can't control them. I think, God, it's because I feel like there's just one thing that I am missing saying, but I'm really struggling to think of what it is. Let's see. Maybe there is a little bit more about the ending. Is that it? Hmm. I guess I'll briefly. So yeah, I appreciate the way that So I've talked some about, he didn't properly grieve. Yeah. When his daughter died, he felt like, well, there is no God. What kind of God would let a little child die? And so he went about disproving, the any kind of, supernatural. Oh wait, did I already say that this video? Ah, crap. Yeah, I feel like there's something I'm missing. I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah, I think maybe I have said everything that I really wanted and needed to. Right, I did. It is kind of fun to think about. So the actress who plays Lily was very pregnant while filming this, so they were careful to, you'll it once you see it, you can't unsee it. She's usually shot in the way that they film her. They'll film like her head, but not like her belly. Near the end, she gets out of a cab. We see her in the cab, but we see like across, so we see like her head sticking up above the seat behind the driver. And when she gets out of the cab, it cuts away almost immediately, as soon as the yeah, right before her belly would come into frame, so yeah. um I think that might cover everything. So yeah, I really appreciate the. No, yeah, I already said that. Let's see. Yes, I think I have said absolutely everything. So yes, the yeah, genuinely compelling. They're near the end where you know Mike is standing there as a ghost. Right. I guess yeah, I think this might have been it. I like the fact that they don't overuse the ghosts. There are several ghosts, or I guess let's see, uh, two ghosts, one zombie. I guess weeknights on CBS, but yeah, they don't constantly use them, and also this effect they have on some of or at least there's that woman who's a ghost. And there's this staticky thing because she died a while ago, back when TV, playback looked like that. So very nicely done on that, giving it this otherworldly feel. But yeah, by 2007, we'd kind of seen movies where, oh, there's a spooky ghost. If you go into that place, be careful, stuff levitates. So yeah. Um, I thought they did a good job of using other things as well to not let it just be that. And it is also just, for this concept at least, I think it is more interesting to dive into his background and understand him as a human being instead of just seeing a bunch of haunting. I like, there are movies where there's more like haunty stuff. I'm a big fan of the, let's see, was it 1960 or 1960s at least? Holy crap, am I seriously blanking on I think it is just called The Haunting, It's that thing where it gets confusing because there's The Haunting and The Haunting of Hill House, and I think both of them are about Hill House, so it's confusing that The Haunting is set. It is a haunting at Hill House, but it's not the movie's haunting at Hill House. But yeah, there at the end when Mike, as a ghost, is standing there in what used to be 1408. There goes that security deposit. He hears his daughter and, turns and starts to walk away. And we get his voiceover. A middle-aged man dies. A little girl dies. No trade.